A very special figure drawing method draws a beveled edged frame around a rectangular shape. But there's a little trick to doing it so it'll show up right. The beveled frame it draws is only 1 pixel thick, so it's a bit hard to see unless you do something to thicken it. Now this program draws rectangles with 2 types of beveled edges. The first thing we do in the paint method is set the value of colors stored in the graphics object to a nice neutral gray. It's best to use something in the middle of the color range because we're going to create a frame that's slightly darker and lighter than the selected color. The primary colors of red, green, and so on don't do so well when you start shading them. Once you see how this program works, try them and you'll see what I mean. The values of X, Y, width, and height are set to define the rectangle that's going to be framed. We use these values to call fill rect to fill an area with our basic color. Then, to make the frame thick enough to be seen clearly, a for loop is set up to loop 5 times. Each time through the loop, a call is made to draw 3D rect to draw a frame around the rectangle. Notice this last argument, the Boolean value. This tells draw 3D rect to shade the edges so the rectangle will appear to be raised. Once the 3D rectangle is drawn, the values for drawing it are adjusted so the next frame is drawn just outside the one that was just finished. The values of X and Y have 1 subtracted from them to place the new upper left-hand corner 1 pixel up and 1 pixel to the left of the current position. 2 is added to both the width and the height, so the new frame line will fit just outside the one previously drawn. The value of I is never used in the loop. It's just a counter to determine the pixel thickness of the frame. You can make this number smaller to produce a thinner frame, and you can make it larger to produce a thicker frame. A value of 5 makes what I think is a nice thickness to a frame without it being too ostentatious. But I don't have any taste, so that's probably wrong. Here we draw a second framed rectangle that's very much like the first one. The values are all initialized, so the new rectangle is the same size as the other, except it's in a different location and will show up under the first one in the window. And notice this. This time the Boolean value is set to false, so the frame is to be shaded in such a way that the rectangle is to appear sunken into the surface instead of raised. When we compile and run the program, it looks like this. Now, if these look like push buttons to you, you've got the right idea. This is as good a way as any to create push buttons, and I know of some places where this technique is used. Notice that we only specified 1 color for our beveled rectangle, but it looks for all the world like there are 3 colors. That's done using a couple of methods of the color object that produce slightly darker and slightly lighter versions of a color. I'll be showing you how to do that in the next lesson. But in the program we just looked at, the paint method seems to be a bit repetitive. The same code was included twice to draw the 2 rectangles. You can do that if you wish, but there is another approach that's probably cleaner and easier to work with. This program does exactly the same thing as the previous one, except for 2 things. For one thing, it uses different colors, and for the other, it uses an internal method named drawBevel. This new method contains the call to draw 3D rect and the loop that contains it. The paint method now only sets the color and calls drawBevel twice with the appropriate values. It's in here that all the action takes place. First, a call is made to fill rect using the position, size, and color passed to this method as arguments. Notice that the graphics object is passed to this method because we can't draw anything without it. The loop is executed the same way it was before. If you'll remember, the only difference inside the bodies of the loops was the setting of the Boolean value passed as the last argument to draw 3D rect. In this case, the Boolean variable in-out is passed to determine whether our rectangle is going to be an innie or an outie. This window is the same as the previous one, except the colors are different. In this example, the color is set to magenta, which has the RGB values 255, 255, and 0. With two of the values already at maximum and the other at its minimum, there's no real way to create a slightly darker or a slightly lighter version without changing the color. Colors are never easy to work with. You just have to pick a starting point and experiment to see what happens.